Hello and welcome to the Ramp Live podcast. My name is Raina C. Richardson. I am the owner of Willow Spoon Creative, and I am so excited to be filling in for Tina tonight. Tina is off doing fabulous things, as she always is. I am even more excited to introduce my guests tonight, Dax Castro and Chad Chelius of Accessibility Unraveled. They are both accessible document specialists, and we're going to have some great conversations. Chad and Dax are two powerhouse document accessibility specialists that came together 3 years ago, developing a podcast of their own. They each have been designing and teaching for more than 25 years and are considered thought leaders in the field of document accessibility. They speak to and train organizations all over the world about creating more inclusive digital content that can be read by anyone, regardless of ability. Dax and Chad, I'm so happy to have you here tonight. Tell us a little bit more about Accessibility Unraveled. What is your origin story? What do
Our,
you do?
our origin story. Wow. Yeah. Well, the kind of like short story is that Dax and I met quite a few years ago, and we met because we both speak at conferences, and we met at one of the conferences that we both had been speaking at, and we really hit it off just because we had common interest in everything, and we really got to be friends, and we really started calling each other on the phone, and we'd be talking about accessibility, bunch of nerds, talking accessibility. And one day Dax was like, Chad, I really think other people would want to hear this, they'd really like to hear about this. And I was like, really? Like, I don't know, this seems really deep to me. I don't know that anybody else would have any interest. And he said, yeah, I think we should do it. And so we got together. And it was really Dax's, idea, and also his skill set too, because I really didn't know anything about doing podcasts. But one day we both got online, and we recorded our first podcast. And I think that was about 2 years ago, Dax.
Yeah, we're on season 3, episode 18. So we are
Yeah.
3 years old and a little bit. So it was, full disclosure, I have ADHD, and when I get focused on a task or a project, I am 100% full steam ahead. And in a weekend, I researched all the software, got all the stuff together, and I'm like, okay, Chad, we have a website, and here's all the what we're doing. And so we put it together, and here we are. We get about we just passed 25,000 downloads over that time. So we are full steam ahead and excited to be here. Thank you so much, Raina, for inviting us. We really appreciate it.
Well,
Yeah. Yeah,
you're
for sure.
welcome. You're welcome. I'm so thrilled that you are able and willing to join us tonight. So help our listeners understand a little bit behind the why behind your work. What are accessible documents? We tend to think of documents as being paper, but really it's a very digital world that we're living in, and increasingly digital, with each year. So tell us a little bit about what accessible documents are and why this is your passion.
Well, Chad and I we got into this business. Obviously, we've been trained, been providing software training for a long time outside of accessibility. And each of us kind of have our own story about how we came into this. But together, we really just want to help people access information. Right. And it's, we think about a lot of different things when it comes to the digital age, but we don't really think about how do you read your phone bill as a person who's blind? Or how do you interpret graphics when people are using red and green and you're colorblind, right? Those things really aren't on the top of our mind. Even to, I was at my haircut place a couple months ago, and I was having a conversation with the stylist, and I was explaining to them what I do, and I brought up the idea of Instagram, and the idea that if you had a picture that just had a caption that said "another wet day at the park," you have no idea as a blind person what that image is. Is that people swimming? In fact, the example was a gentleman holding a really slobbery ball with his dog, there at the park. And so it was really interesting because his answer was, wow, or his reaction was, wow, I didn't know blind people looked at Instagram. And I was just kind of floored. But it is what
Yeah.
we do. We teach people how to make content readable for people who are not just blind, because that's a part of it, but it's a smaller part. But people who are low vision or colorblind or have cognitive impairment, all of that really kind of is in our wheelhouse, what we do.
Mhm. It's
Yeah,
very
and
important work.
although training is a key part of what we do, another big part is just awareness,
Yeah.
right? I mean, as
Mhm.
Dax was describing, a lot of times we just kind of make people aware that like you had said that your hairstylist said, "Oh, I didn't know blind people were on Instagram."
Right.
Why wouldn't they be? Right?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like what, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
And we have this notion of like what we expect blind people or even visually impaired people of being able to do. And it's
Mhm.
an unfair assumption, right? I mean,
Right.
you know, I tell this story. I was able to do some work for the Lighthouse for the Blind in Seattle. And the gentleman Antonio came out to greet me and he shook my hand. He said, "Hi." He's like, "Okay, follow me." And I followed him all the way back in this industrial building, all the way back to the room where we were going to be training. And it wasn't for another 15 minutes that I realized he was blind. I mean, it was mind blowing. I mean, and he was just able to navigate that building so well and without any challenges or anything like that. And it's just, it really was eye opening for me. I mean, this was many, many years ago, but it was eye opening for me of the abilities of everybody out there. We need to change our mindset for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. The mindset is often the biggest barrier when we
Yeah.
assume that someone can't, then we're not designing with the possibility that they can, which becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Then,
Yeah.
you've created a design that is not accessible, whether that is a document or whether that is a physical barrier, so many ways. So,
And if I could add to that story,
please.
that I went into that training engagement. They said like there were blind people who were working at this organization, and me being very naive, thought that they were making crafts or trinkets of some sort. They were making aerospace parts for Boeing and Lockheed Martin. Like it was just so eye-opening to me, right? You know what I mean? Because I went in with this presumption of what I thought they were doing, and here they're doing incredible work, that they're doing amazing things. So
Mhm.
it was really a great experience.
That's awesome, and it does speak to the diversity within disability. We can become an expert on our own disability if we have one, and it is the group that you can always join. We're always accepting new members. um but there is so much diversity within it. We don't necessarily understand how someone else is experiencing either a similar condition or a completely different one. And I think your story of expanding your mindset is something that we can all take to heart, all ask ourselves, how can we expand our mindset?
Well, on that topic, we get this question all the time where people say, "Well, why do I have to go through all this trouble of making these documents accessible, doing all this stuff? If they want an accessible document, they can just reach out, and if we get somebody who needs that, then we'll make the document for them." And one thing that people don't understand is, when you force someone to self-identify that they have a disability or that they need a different format, that's a very much of a privacy issue. And in fact, some might say it violates HIPAA, that I have the right to have my own, my disability is mine, and I shouldn't have to disclose to you what I need. You should just be able to provide content that's accessible for everyone. And so we get this, why can't I just put at the top of the PDF for an accessible version, email this number or call this number. And the reality is that most of the time when they do that, it takes days or weeks to get
Right.
that document back.
Mm-hmm.
And so where does the end user? The end user is just waiting for someone to actually, get the work done. And that's just that's not equality. That is not equity for sure.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So, can you give us a sense of how large this problem is? We talked about we really are in a digital age, and especially in the past 3 years, so much more has moved online. Downloading restaurant menus, downloading, like you said, the your telephone bill, and numerous documents that you might need either at the doctor's office, at whatever. How big is this problem of document inaccessibility?
Well, Raina, I mean, if you I don't know what the numbers are, but the entire federal government, right, and any agency within the federal government is required by law to make sure that every document made available to the public be accessible, right? Now, that being said, the federal government has, can I say, failed miserably? Can I say that?
I would
on
say
the
less than 0.5% of the documents out
yeah,
there. Less than
it's
0.5%.
it's
We can
really
say there
crazy.
was an attempt.
There
Yes.
was an
Maybe.
attempt. There was
There
an
was an
attempt.
attempt.
But I've done training for some of these federal agencies, and we'll do an introduction at the beginning of class, and the people will say, well, now that it's a law, we need to do this. And I was like, wait a minute. It's been a law for 25 years, right? This is not something that just popped up and all of a sudden we're forced to do this. It's been around for quite a long time. And,
yeah.
At the beginning of the podcast, Raina, you had said, well, we always think about paper, right?
Mhm.
Paper is the most inaccessible type of media, for somebody who's blind. And Dax and I, it's funny, we have a funny story. We were at a restaurant, and I'm sure you've experienced this, right? I swear to God, restaurants, it's a conspiracy, right? It's dimly lit lighting, and their font, their menu is set in like 8-point font with horrible contrast, right?
Yep.
And one of the things Dax
Super
and I,
narrow, also always the most narrow, thin font that you can find available.
And Dax and I always say that accessibility benefits everyone.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're at this restaurant, and of course they have the QR code to bring up the menu on your phone, and we bring it up, and it's like tiny font. Well, we opened it up in liquid mode on our phones, and
in Acrobat, right?
In Adobe Acrobat Mobile. Yeah. And it was like the sky opened up, and I'm like, oh my God, I could read this. It's amazing. I can see what's on the menu. I can see what's available to us. And so it really is true that accessibility benefits everyone, and in that was a classic example where there was a barrier for us, right? I mean, I wear glasses, right? I've only worn glasses for a year, but now I can't exist without them. And I'm trying to read this menu, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't see a thing. And we popped it open Acrobat, and all of a sudden we could enlarge the text. We could read the content. We could find out what we wanted to eat that night. It was just it was an experience at a very low level. I don't want to compare our experience to somebody who truly has a disability, but it was just a really poignant example of where accessibility benefited us at a time when we needed it very much.
No, I think it's a great example. And let's face it, how many people have Adobe Acrobat on their phone? How many people would know that this is even an option to circumnavigate that barrier? You had the skills, you had the knowledge to do that, but I'd say the average person is probably unaware of it, and they're just going to sit there and struggle and struggle and struggle needlessly.
Well, Reader is on most phones, and literally there is a little icon that looks like a water drop. And when you press that, if the document was created with plain text, it wasn't done in Illustrator or some other graphic program, it basically reads the structure, tries to figure out any hierarchy, like beverages. Is that a heading? Okay, well then what are the beverages under it? So you can collapse menu items and expand descriptions. And I will tell you, the people who created the menu probably had no idea that because of following just the basic principles of how to create an accessible document, they were able to, in fact, make this document way more useful for people without really knowing it. Chad and I always say that if you follow best practices for creating Word or PowerPoint or InDesign documents, that if you follow the best practices, you're going to get 60 to 70% there for accessibility principles. but we just have so many bad habits and
Yeah.
workarounds,
Mhm.
and this is the way I learned how to do it. And a lot of time that just makes it harder for accessibility.
Mhm. So let's talk about what it's like to build in accessibility versus having to do a remediation, which is when
Mm.
it's not built in. Um, can you share a little bit about those experiences? Because I know you do a lot of remediation.
Well, to be honest, Raina, we don't do a lot of remediation. Like our whole principle is to try to avoid remediation, to be honest. Like our goal is to teach people how to use source applications, Word, PowerPoint, InDesign, use them properly. As Dax was just explaining, if you use them properly and you implement basic best practices, you're going to get a pretty decent result when you make a PDF out of those applications, right?
Yeah.
It really pays big dividends, right? But to your point, if somebody gives us a file that was created without intent, now it's hard and
Yeah.
expensive and time consuming, right? And to be fair, we do offer that service, but it's more out of necessity than desire, right? We
Yes.
really don't want to be doing remediation. We're all about teaching a person to fish. We
Mhm.
want to teach them, hey, do this and you're going to have great success, right? Whereas if you keep doing it the way you've been doing it, you're going to have much less success.
Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely. And it really falls down to things like, in Word, they have headings, heading level 1, heading level 2, heading level 3 at the top. Using those, not typing manual bullets, like use the bullet feature within Word. Keeping your tables simple, making descriptive links. So it says, click here to download the earnings report. And all of it is the hyperlink rather than just the click here part, right? It's really just about some really simple basic steps. And when you export to a PDF and include the export tags for accessibility, you don't need to be expert at accessibility. Your
No.
document may not be perfect, but it's not going to have what we call no, it'll be a document with no significant barriers. And if we can just get that far, that is a huge improvement from where we are now. Whereas even organizations, world organizations and organizations like the CDC or US, the EPA, or lots of NASA, lots of different organizations right now, I would say less than 1% of their content is accessible.
Yeah. A
Yeah.
lot of our colleagues, Dax and I have a lot of colleagues who are blind.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say the majority of them, when we talk to them, that their first response to us is PDFs suck.
Yeah.
That's what we get. The PDFs suck. And we're like, no, they don't. But I think in your experience, you've just always gotten bad PDFs, right? You've
Yeah.
never gotten. Dax and I always say, give me the file, and I'll give you a PDF, and then you tell me what you think, how you think the experience is, right? But that's our challenge. I mean, Dax and I have a mountain in front of us, right?
Yeah.
We're chipping away one person at a time, right? We're trying to get people educated. We're trying to give them the knowledge they need. And we're hopeful that, years down the road, we're going to be in a much better place, but we do have an uphill battle in front of us.
Understood, understood. So for folks out there who are maybe wanting to include accessibility, but just don't even know where to start and are maybe a little bit intimidated because they do think it has to be perfect.
Right.
And let's face it, we all, we never want to settle for good enough. The disability community that has been told good enough is good enough for way too long, and it's not.
Yeah.
But there has to be a starting point,
Yeah.
so for people who might feel intimidated by that journey, can you talk about some of the things that they can do to get started, some of the ways that they can take those baby steps to at least meeting that 60 to 70% accessibility?
Well, we actually, I know that off air, we kind of talked about a handout that we want to give people, but
Mhm.
I will tell you that we have another handout that I really think is probably more helpful specifically to what you just asked. And if people reach out to us on LinkedIn, so Chad Chilius or Dax Castro, reach out to us on LinkedIn. We'll give you this document, and it is the 10 things you can do to improve accessibility without being an expert. And it literally is 10 simple things. Title your document, describe your images. And if you're doing it in Word, most anyone can right click on the image and go to edit alternate description and add a simple description of what the image is about. Use headings. We already talked about that one already, right? Use heading structure. Don't just highlight something and increase the font size and make it bold, but use the headings that are built in. Avoid excessive bullet levels, right? If you're using bullets, if you've got 6 levels of deep of bullets, oh my gosh, it is so hard as a screen reader user to understand where you are in that hierarchy.
People love bullets. I mean,
Yeah.
it's hard for a sighted user, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I've been reading
Absolutely.
documents and it's like bullet, sub bullet, sub bullet, and you're like, I have no idea where I am anymore. You know,
Meanwhile,
Yeah.
it's almost entirely to the end of the page, and the
Yep.
column is this
it's like,
big.
yeah,
Three
like this
words.
wide.
Well, and what people don't understand is that assistive technology will read the list level for every time you change levels. So you're going to hear list level 1, list level 2, list 3 items, list level 2, list 4 items, list level 3. And it's going to be giving you this primer on where you are in the list levels as you're trying to digest the content so you know where you are. Very obtrusive, very much of a bad user experience. Avoid images of text, right? Sometimes we design a banner in Photoshop that says something cool and we drop it into our document. If you do that, then make sure you add a description that says what the text says on the image. Keep your table simple. That's a longer conversation, but literally just straight columns and rows, and you're going to be better off. Avoid faded color schemes. So remember, Chad talked about our plight with menus and 70% gray on a tan background. I mean, I don't understand people sometimes, right? And then avoid red and green as an indicator. This is one of those ones where we see this all the time in line graphs. Add a marker. If you've got 2 lines in your line graph, make the data points like one of them a square and the other one a triangle. And now it doesn't matter what color it is. I can tell that line A is the one with the squares and line B is the one with the triangles. And then finally, using plain language. And that goes to people with cognitive disability, right? Because it's not just about screen readers. The last couple were colorblind, considerations, and the last one really is cognitive consideration. So if we like to add all these fancy words into our document, I will say I use ChatGPT a lot and to kind of decipher stuff, and I'll copy something, put it in ChatGPT and say, explain this to me at an 8th grade reading level, and it will literally go through and explain it to me. And if people would do more of that, how do I explain this simply? Then they'd be much better off. So those are the top 10 things. And if you want that list, just reach out to us in addition to the one we're going to talk about here in a bit. But yeah, it is, you do not have to be a rocket scientist or an accessibility expert to start.
That's awesome. And I know you've said that some accessibility is better than none, and
Yes.
we should just pick a starting point and grow from there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We always say baby steps, right?
Yep.
Like don't think you've got to make every file you create PDF UA or WCAG compliant. Don't focus on that. Focus on the fundamentals and just run with it. Take
Yeah.
baby steps. And as you get better, okay, now start adding in a little bit more. But even doing that is just going to have such a huge impact on society in general. It's just really going to be good for everyone.
If you could do 2 things, if you only pick 2, use headings in your document and describe your images. Do those 2 things,
Yep.
and you've significantly decreased the amount of barriers in your content.
Wow. Yeah. So someone is now learning these skills, they're trying to implement them, they want to assess how accessible they've made a document. I know there are a lot of checkers out there, um, but do checkers necessarily mean
Mhm.
a document is accessible?
I think you're giving
How
us a
You're,
can
softball here, Raina.
yeah, yeah,
You're throwing us a
Raina,
softball.
Raina
how
just like lobbed this. She's like, here, have this, please.
Right.
and if not, how can you use the checkers to help you on your journey?
Well, Chad, I'll let you finish, Chad, but typically we say that accessibility is a series of manual checks and automated tools, Chad.
Yep. No, I mean, that's exactly what I was going to say, Dax. I mean, we always say accessibility is a series of automated and manual checks because checkers are actually pretty stupid, right? Like checkers are not these AI wonder applications, right? I mean, checkers are checking for very specific information, you know. And again, like the classic example is you get a PDF file and every tag in the PDF file is a P tag, which stands for paragraph, right? And the equivalent, Raina, and all the listeners out there, the equivalent of that to kind of put it in perspective, it would be like you stopping by the newsstand and grabbing a newspaper, getting it back to your desk, and everything in the newspaper is in 12-point type. There's no headings, there's no captions, nothing to delineate the information in that. You just have to read it from start to finish. That's exactly what that experience is. And a checker is going to run through that. It's going to say, you're good. You're good because everything has a tag. That's all it cares about. It's not smart enough to know that, hey, this big text on page 1 should be a heading level 1 tag. And this subhead on page 2 should be a heading level 2. It's just fundamentally they're pretty stupid. Now, that being said, they're able to check for things very, very quickly that would take you and I a really long time to do. And that's why it's a balance, right? I mean, yes, Dax and I rely heavily on checkers, but we also have the knowledge and the skill set to look at a document and kind of spot check areas and be like, oh, wait a minute, this is not tagged correctly. Or, hey, this image isn't tagged at all. They forgot to include it, you know?
Or the image has image of sunglasses, automatic description generated with high confidence. So in Microsoft Word, you can turn on the ability for Microsoft's AI to suggest alternate text. The problem is that no one goes back and checks before they export. So they run the accessibility checker. Microsoft Accessibility Checker is a great place to start. But if you have that automatic generated alt text, it'll just say, great, you're good, right? It won't let you know, hey, go review these and make sure they're right. The CDC, actually, it was the World Health Organization, was publishing lots of COVID reports early on, and all of their bar charts and line graphs in one document, and there were about 50 of them, said image of sunglasses as a description for the bar charts and line graphs. And it's because someone didn't check it. And so the checkers are going to say, is text here? And if there is, then
that's all it cares. That's all it cares about. And that to say, Microsoft's AI is not ChatGPT level AI. It is like very, very rudimentary, right? Like I said, it thought that every bar chart in that document was an image of sunglasses. So it's not what it's made out to be. That's for sure.
There was an attempt again.
Yeah, there was an attempt, but didn't work.
And we can joke about it, but obviously, something like that, COVID data during that time, this is very serious. This is people are concerned. This is information that people do need to be able to access reliably and consistently. So
we talked about something earlier, and I want to bring it up. We talked about the physical paper, right? And we run a PDF accessibility Facebook group. This Facebook group has 3,600 members in it. And we have several blind members in our group, one of which somebody was asking about a wet signature. They said, how do I, I don't need to make this accessible. The idea is they need to print this out and then sign it. And one of the blind people in our groups chimed in and said, why? I can digitally sign your document by myself. But if you forced me to print it out and wet sign it, I have to bring someone over to my house, show me the area where I have to sign, and then actually be there while I sign it to make sure I got it on the right line. He said, do you know how emasculating that is of an experience? I may not want them to know what I'm signing, but they're not going to be able to not see it when I sign it, because they have to show me where to sign. And so he was very much a big proponent for digital signature in the document. And it just goes back to, we have this preconceived notion and we don't understand the user experience. Chad and I always say, what do we expect the user experience to be in order to design an accessible solution? And just so many people don't think about it.
Yeah.
Well, and digital signatures in some ways is another one of those failed technologies, right? Because it sounded really great in theory, but for the even the average user, it's nearly impossible for them to properly implement digital signatures. I mean, it truly is. And I'm not going to go into the details of it right now. That's why there's services out there like DocuSign, Adobe Sign. Their level of accessibility is a bit questionable, right? But that they're the only services that really allow you to implement digital signatures effectively in your organization. Because without it, you need a very robust IT department, and you really need to be big enough to be able to do it. And a lot of the federal agencies have it. It's connected to their, what do they call that? The CAC card, I think is what they call it. Their ID card that they carry around. They can sign documents by putting that in the computer, and then they can digitally sign it. But for the average person, it's nearly impossible.
Right. And let's face it, it's mostly the average person that is needing to access this and to create signatures and to conduct business. Hopefully, with whatever level of privacy they feel they want and need.
Yes.
Well, and that's where people like Chad and I come in, and we can help, kind of guide people on what an accessible experience is like, help them kind of navigate some of those pitfalls so that, the end result is ultimately accessible. And I use a screen reader every single day for at least 30 minutes a day, every day. And so I consider myself a pretty avid screen reader user, but I am not a lived experience screen reader user where all of my information comes from JAWS or NVDA. And so it's a kind of a different thing. So, and we have people in our circle of profession, our professional circle, that, do provide those services that, for us to test with a native screen reader user. So, yeah,
absolutely. So you do provide so many great resources. Let's take a few minutes to talk about some of them, because I know people, and I'm one of them, all are always looking to learn more. And I'm thankful to be one of the members of the Facebook group, and I've learned so much already. But let's talk about some of the other resources that you offer. We started talking about your podcast, so tell folks a little bit more about that.
So our podcast, you can find us on all streaming platforms. If you search Chax, or even, so I tag it with Chilius because it's a very unique last name. So if you look up Chad Chilius, CHELIUS, or Dax, you'll find us. And we stream on all major platforms. We have the website, Chax, CHAX, chat.com. And we try to upload our transcripts there. Our YouTube channel has copies every time we do a podcast. It gets automatically posted to our YouTube channel, so it has captions and a transcript that goes along with it. So it is accessible, and you can find us at youtube.com/@A11Y. And that is the new @ symbols that YouTube is kind of thrown out there now. So they're trying to follow the Instagram handle kind of thing. So I scooped up A11Y. And for those of you who don't know, A11Y is an acronym, or I don't think it's really called an acronym. It's a group of letters that is designed to be accessibility starts with A, ends with Y, and there's 11 letters in between. So it's a hashtag or a nomenclature that's been adopted by the accessibility community. And so I kind of jumped on it. So yeah, so we've got podcasts and lots of tutorial videos and lots of great stuff. So good stuff there.
And you also offer live classes for people who really want to learn in depth about any of these making documents accessible. So
yeah. I mean, that really is the core of our business, right? I mean, what we are, Dax and I are trainers, right? And the accessibility training, right? We've just had huge demand for it, and that's what we do. Our objective is to teach people how to create accessible PDF files. We also are here to assist your company in implementing accessibility in your organization, because that is often a big hurdle for people. It's so often that we have like one person at a company that recognizes that they need to do this, but they're having a heck of a time getting the C-suite executives and the higher ups to buy into it and understand why it's so important, and why we need to do this. And so Dax and I will often do presentations for those people, or we'll come into their organization and we'll give a presentation and explain to them, hey, listen, this is why this is important. This is why you want to jump on board and make sure that the content that you post is also accessible. And in many ways, we're trying to prepare people, because there's been, there's several places, in the world that have made accessibility mandatory, right? I mean, closest to us, I would say, would be Ontario. Canada has the AODA, which is basically a law that was written in that says, even if you're a small business, anything you post online, your website, and anything you put online for the public needs to be accessible, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of our clients, are in Canada, because they're trying to adapt and trying to accommodate this. So,
well, and people, matter of fact, tomorrow we have a document testing with Acrobat 3-hour course. All of our courses are 3 hours long. They're live. They start at 8 a.m. in the morning on a Pacific Standard Time, which is kind of good time zones mostly for people. Although people in Australia and some other places are, it's hard. But we do provide a recording of the class, and there's always handouts, and it is we have at least 2 to 3 drop-in classes a month. And the nice thing is that we developed these online classes because so many people were like, my organization can't afford to hire trainers to come in and do this work, and it's not training can be a couple $1,000s if you've got a team to teach. So we decided, let's offer something that's affordable. So it's $300, but there's a $75 coupon that we run just continuously, makes it $224. And we just really try to offer a variety of classes that we think people will really resonate with. And document testing with Adobe Acrobat is the one for tomorrow. And then our next class that we have after that is July 6th, Thursday, the Thursday in July. And it is accessible forms, right? Yep, it is creating accessible forms on July 6th. So, if you want to take a deep dive, I know this isn't necessarily a technical audience, but if you want to understand some stuff, we'd love to help you.
Absolutely. Well, and as you mentioned, there's also the PDF accessibility Facebook group, which I can attest is a constant source of great information, great community, and very welcoming, I think, for people at any level of doing this work. I've never seen anything negative. Honestly, I've always seen people
Yeah.
wanting to help, wanting to go above, wanting to help you understand how to improve, and it's really lovely to see, especially in an online space.
Yeah.
Oh
Online
yeah, because
spaces are not known for
I
being
belong
that
to some chicken
welcoming.
groups, and I raise chickens and alpaca and some other animals and stuff. And I belong to this chicken group, and about every day there is some toxic post about somebody posts an innocent question and everybody attacks. You never see that in our group.
No,
Everybody's
No.
always willing to help.
never.
Sometimes maybe a little bit too much help, and that's okay. But that's where Chad and I come in and we monitor the chat. It does have a live chat actually that's been pretty active. I'm actually been really happy with how active the live chat has been. And
Mm.
3,652 members strong is not bad. I started the group in 2017, I think, and it's been great. I really Chad and I now run it, and we've got quite a few people who started as accessibility foundlings and now are accessibility experts, and we really appreciate them in our group.
Yeah.
Great. And obviously, if as you mentioned, I'm going to just repeat it here. If folks are interested in the 10 tips to accessibility, if you are not an accessibility expert, they can reach out to both you and Chad on LinkedIn.
Yep.
Yep.
And we will be adding the link to access the PowerPoint tips to the RAMP website once this episode is uploaded.
Right. We actually just created a new sheet. We know that PowerPoint's a program that almost everybody kind of dabbles in at some point, but we don't necessarily think about how to present accessibly. When we're standing on stage or we're in the room in front of everybody, how are we relating the information on the screen? Are we taking into account how, the color blindness? Are we taking into account the that there might be someone who has low vision in the room? And did we make our fonts large enough and not 60% gray on a teal background, that kind of thing. But those are the physicalities. But then, are we speaking clearly? Are we keeping our slides short, but making our content meaningful? Lots of really good tips in there. I don't want to, definitely go download that, and accessibilityunraveled.com/PPT for PowerPoint. And we promise we won't spam you. Just you'll get a link right away. And if you check the box for just give me the handout, you'll never hear from us again. So.
All right. Any final words on accessible documents? Any final encouragement to our listeners in their journey to create more accessibility?
I would say just get started. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? As we said before, I mean, just start with the basics, right? As Dax pointed out, if you're using Word, learn how to use styles. Not only is it helpful for accessibility, it's super efficient document management. If you create a document in Word and your boss comes back to you and says, "Hey, could you make all the headings in this document a little bit bigger?" If you did it manually, that's like 30, 45 minutes of work, right? If you created a style, it's 30 seconds to update that. So it's not just for accessibility, it's efficient document management. But the topic of this podcast, of course, is accessibility. And so if you use your heading styles, if when you add an image to your document, you right click on it and say edit alt text and describe that image, you're going to make big strides, huge strides with very, very little work.
All right. Well, thank you, Chad. Thank you, Dax, so much for joining me tonight on the RAMP podcast. Thank you to Accessibility Unraveled. I appreciate you all and the work that you do.
Well,
Thanks,
thank you very
Raina.
much for having us.
Thank you.